Alright guys, this video is going to cover Objective 3, which is all about epithelial tissue. And so as we mentioned earlier, epithelial tissue covers and lines, and its main job is going to be to cover the exterior surfaces and kind of protect us from the outside, and it's also going to line all of the internal cavities. And in addition to that, it's also going to form a lot of our glands. And so just some of the general characteristics. Remember that a lot of your tissues are going to be characterized by the cells that they have as well as the extracellular matrix. And so in the case of epithelial tissue, it's mostly cells. There's not going to be not as much of the extracellular matrix. It's pretty much cells attached to cells attached to cells. And so they don't have a lot of that space in between them. They are going to cover body surface, talked about before, and that's going to include the like your exterior surface, like your skin. They're going to line our digestive and respiratory tracts, our blood vessels, and like we mentioned earlier, they're going to form our glands. Now they have distinct cell surfaces. This is going to be one of the characteristics that's unique to our epithelial tissue. They're going to have what's called an apical surface, which is free. It's not actually touching or attached to other cells. So in spaces where there's cavities or there's holes, or like in a blood vessel or a hollow organ, they will line those. And so that's where you'll find that apical surface. In the case of our skin, it's going to be the outside layer where it's not attached. And then we're also going to have what's called the basal surface, which is going to attach to the basement membrane. So obviously the cells are going to have to attach to something. And so a lot of times this is going to attach the epithelial tissue to the tissues that are below it. So that's going to be one of your characteristics, is the apical surface as well as the basal surface. Because there's a lot of cells and they're closely packed together, they're going to be connected in a variety of ways. And so they have some special connections that we call cell junctions. And so there's all different types. There's desmosomes, which are kind of like buttons. There's tight junctions, which help prevent leakage. And so because it's a lot of cell-to-cell contact, there's going to be a lot of these specialized connections that hold those cells together. They're non-vascular. This is going to be a unique feature, which means they do not have blood vessels. They don't have a blood supply directly running through them. Now they do have to have access to a blood supply, so that's usually going to be in the tissues that are below that or underneath the basement membrane. And so they still have to get nutrients and gases like oxygen and things like that. And so what's going to happen is those are just going to diffuse across the basement membrane from the tissues that they're attached to. And because they are going to be nourished, even though they don't have their own like blood vessels running through them, because they're well nourished, they're going to be capable of regeneration. And so your epithelial tissues are usually constantly being replaced. They are going to be exposed, and so a lot of times they're subject to damage, and so we're able to replace those cells that are damaged constantly. Remember, we have the cell cycle that includes mitosis, and so that's going to be constantly taking place in your epithelial tissues. So which one is not a characteristic of epithelial tissue? That is going to be D. Action potentials is going to be a feature of your nervous tissue. All right, now some general functions. We've already mentioned several of these as we've kind of talked about epithelial tissue in general, but they are going to be protective. They're going to protect underlying structures, so when they're covering an organ or they're covering the outside of our body. They are a barrier. In fact, the skin is part of our immune system. It's going to be our first line of defense in keeping things out. They're also going to help hold water in. They can allow materials to pass through. So like oxygen and carbon dioxide, they're going to be able to pass through those epithelial tissues. They can secrete substances. We mentioned our membranes, like the mucous membranes. Also, some of your glands are going to be, or all of your glands are going to be secreting some type of substance. There are some that secrete enzymes. And then they're also good at absorbing. So you've got a lot of epithelial tissues that are lining like your digestive tract, and so in those areas we're going to be absorbing nutrients and absorbing water. And so a lot of those are going to have special proteins that allow those materials to be absorbed into other cells. So which of the following is not a function of epithelial tissue? They do absorb, they do secrete, they are a barrier, but B, the word contracts goes with our muscle tissue. All right, so there's different types of epithelial tissue, and we're going to classify them based on two characteristics. Number one, the number of cell layers, and number two, the shape of the cells that are on the superficial end of the tissue, the ones that are most on the outside or closest to the outside of the body. And so when it comes to the number of cell layers, you have simple, which is one layer, stratified, which is more than one layer, and then pseudo-stratified. It's actually only one layer, but it appears to be more just because of the way the cells are situated. And then we have three shapes. We have squamous, which are flat. I like to think of squamous being squashed, so they're kind of flattened, kind of like fish scales. Cuboidal are going to be just like what the name sounds. They're going to be cube-like. They kind of look like little dice. And then columnar, once again, just like what it sounds like, they're going to be taller, like columns. And so when we put those two together, we can get the names of our epithelial tissues. So like simple squamous would be one layer of flat cells. We have down here stratified cuboidal. That would be more than one layer of cube-shaped cells. Sorry about that. And so we just use the combination of the layers as well as the shape to identify those tissues. And so a single layer of flat cells, single layer would be simple. Flat cells would be squamous. So our answer here would be simple squamous. All right, now also included in our epithelial tissue is going to be our glands. And glands are structures that are going to secrete substances. And we have two main types of glands. We have endocrine and exocrine. And for the most part, they are going to be made up of epithelial tissue. There could be some that contain connective tissue as well. So endocrine equals hormones. Your endocrine glands are the ones that secrete hormones. They are ductless. And so in order to release their secretions, they go directly into surrounding fluids. They're normally released into the bloodstream. And so the key to endocrine glands is they secrete hormones that are going to travel. So the hormones will be produced in the endocrine gland, but they will trigger responses in other target cells somewhere else in the body. And this is pretty much what our endocrine system is going to be. And then we have exocrine glands, and exocrine glands are going to secrete their secretions into a duct that's going to go to a nearby area. So they don't have to travel long distance. And so the ducts are going to lead to an epithelial surface somewhere, and these include like those mucus glands or sweat glands or mammary glands. And so it really just depends on where they're going, but the key is they are going to secrete their secretions into a duct directly to a nearby tissue. And so blank glands release hormones, and blank glands release contents through a duct. Endocrine is hormones, and exocrine is ducts. And so just a little bit more on exocrine glands. They could be just single cells, and then if that's the case, we call those goblet cells. They're going to be in our digestive tract. And then most of your exocrine glands are going to be multicellular, and so we can classify them by how they secrete, the nature of the substances they secrete, and then the structure and shape of the glands and the ducts. And so there's three main modes of secretion. We have merocrine, and the key to merocrine is that they are going to release their secretions by exocytosis. And so this is one of those examples of bulk transport. So vesicles will contain the secretion. They will fuse with the cell membrane, and they will release those substances into the duct. And so an example of that is a salivary gland that releases saliva. Your apocrine, what they're going to do is the secretory vesicles are going to accumulate, and the whole end, or the apical surface, the whole tip of the area will pinch off. And so it's not just a simple releasing into the nearby area. There's a pinching off that occurs on that apical surface. And so mammary glands are like that. And we also have holocrine, and this is where the whole cell is literally going to kind of die and release those substances. So the cells that are containing the secretion are going to rupture. The cell is going to die, and then they'll be released that way. And this is going to be like our oil glands. And so there you can see you just have little vesicles releasing by exocytosis. That's merocrine. Here you have the whole tip of the cell is being pinched off. That's apocrine. And here you have the cells disintegrating and being released, and that's going to be your holocrine. And so matching up the descriptions, merocrine, the key word was exocytosis. Apocrine, you have the whole apical surface being pinched off. And holocrine is when the cell ruptures. And then matching with their example, merocrine was salivary, apocrine was your mammary glands, and holocrine were your sebaceous glands. And that is going to wrap up Objective 3. We will move forward in the next video with our next type of tissue, which is connective.